Greetings, wanderers of the strange and seekers of shadows. Before we descend into tonight's unsettling tale, I hope your day, or night, has brought you some peace. Whether you're starting your morning in New York, sipping tea under gray London skies, or lost in midnight musings somewhere in Tokyo, tell me, what time is it where you are? And where do you call home on this restless, turning world? If this is your first time joining us, welcome to Dark Whispers, the place where reality blurs and forgotten truths echo in the silence. And if you've walked with us before, you already know. The deeper we go, the darker it gets. If the unknown calls to you, if mystery feels like home, make sure to subscribe. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Tonight's story comes from an enigmatic source, a document that surfaced anonymously on a conspiracy forum back in 2019. No name, no trace. But the language, the historical detail, and the technical precision suggest someone who knew far more than they should have. The title was stark, ominous. What we hit up there, a technician's account of Operation Fishbowl, 1962. What follows is told as truth. Whether you believe it is entirely up to you. But remember, the most terrifying stories are the ones that hide just beneath the surface of the official narrative. So, kill the lights, lean in close, and follow me to a forgotten atoll in the Pacific, where a young radar technician named David Rowe learned that some secrets weren't meant to stay buried, because sometimes the sky itself fractures when you dig too deep. The manuscript of David Rowe, recovered from classified materials, 1962 and 1963. My name is David Rowe, and by the time you read this, I'm probably dead. If you're reading it at all, it means my niece found the hidden compartment in my basement wall, just like I told her to if I ever went missing. I'm writing this in 1987, 25 years after the events I'm about to recount, and I still wake up some nights in a cold sweat, haunted by that low-frequency hum that blanketed Johnston Atoll like a layer of dread. I was 28 years old in 1962, working as a radar and telemetry specialist with the United States Air Force, stationed at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. I held top-secret clearance, which was standard for someone in my position. But until then, I had never worked on anything beyond routine missile tracking. That changed on a Tuesday morning in June, when Colonel Morrison called me into his office. "Rowe," he said, without looking up from a file that had more classification stamps than I'd ever seen in one place. "What's your family situation?" "Sir?" I asked, confused by the question. "Wife? Kids? Girlfriend? Anyone who'd notice if you vanished for a few months?" I shifted uneasily in my chair. "No, sir. Divorced last year. No kids." "Good." He finally looked up, and I noticed his eyes had the sleepless, sunken look of someone carrying more than his share of burdens. "Ever heard of Johnston Atoll?" "No, sir." Most people haven't. It's an island in the Pacific that doesn't officially exist, except it does, and you're going there. He slid a folder across the desk. "This is your new assignment. Read it, memorize it, then burn it. You leave tomorrow. 0600 hours. Inside the folder was a single sheet of paper with sparse information. Location, Johnston Atoll, Pacific Ocean. Grid, reference, classified operation, Dominic, subproject. Glass curtain. Duration, indefinite. My listed job title was Atmospheric Radiation Telemetry Calibration Specialist, a title I'd never heard before and didn't fully understand. "Sir, what exactly is atmospheric radiation telemetry calibration?" I asked. Colonel Morrison's jaw clenched. "You'll find out when you get there. And Rowe, whatever you see, whatever you hear, whatever you think you understand, you don't. Understood?" "Yes, sir. One more thing." He pulled a small device from his desk. "This is a dosimeter. Wear it at all times. If it starts clicking, get underground. If it starts screaming, pray." The flight to Johnston Atoll took 14 hours, including a refueling stop at Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii. I was the only passenger aboard a military transport, and the crew treated me like I was carrying a live warhead. No one spoke to me except to offer a meal that tasted like cardboard soaked in regret. As we approached the island, I pressed my face to the window. What I saw would be my home for the next 18 months. A tiny strip of land, maybe 2 miles long and half a mile wide, consisting mostly of airstrips and military installations. The Pacific stretched endlessly in every direction, a blue void that made it feel like we were landing at the end of the world. The moment I stepped off the plane, I was hit by the oppressive heat and humidity, but also something stranger. A faint metallic taste lingered in the air, making my teeth ache. There was a subtle vibration, like a constant hum, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. My dosimeter clicked now and then. I assumed that was normal. I was greeted by a man in civilian clothing who introduced himself as Dr. Reginald Hawthorne, project director for Glass Curtain. He was tall, thin, prematurely gray, with pale skin that said he hadn't seen much sunlight. His handshake was firm but cold, and his eyes shared the same haunted look I'd seen in Colonel Morrison. "Welcome to Johnston Atoll, Mr. Rowe," he said as he led me to a waiting jeep. "I trust your flight was tolerable." "Yes, sir, though I still don't fully understand my role here." Dr. Hawthorne glanced around before answering. "Your job is to ensure the accuracy of our atmospheric readings during the upcoming tests. We're studying the effects of high-altitude detonations on the upper atmosphere." "Detonations? You mean nuclear?" "Yes, Mr. Rowe. Atomic detonations. Very high in the sky." As we drove across the island, a few things struck me as unusual. First, the number of personnel, easily over 1,000, seemed excessive for a research post. Second, the equipment was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Enormous radar arrays pointed straight skyward, and strange devices scattered around the island like mechanical fungi. But the most unnerving sight was the hangar. Enormous, windowless, surrounded by twin fences topped with razor wire. Armed guards in unmarked uniforms patrolled its perimeter. "What's in the hangar?" I asked. "Doctor," Hawthorne's grip tightened on the wheel. "That's not your concern, Mr. Rowe. Your job is telemetry calibration. I suggest you focus on that." My quarters were in a Quonset hut I shared with 3 other men: Bobby Chen, an electronics tech from San Francisco, Marcus Webb, a photographer with the Army Signal Corps, and Dr. James Kellerman, a physicist from the University of Chicago who had worked on black projects since the Manhattan Project. That first night, over a game of poker and warm beer, I tried to get a sense of what we were actually doing on this isolated patch of Earth. "So, what exactly are we testing?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Bobby exchanged a look with Marcus before answering. "Officially, high-altitude nuclear effects on radio and satellite systems." "And unofficially?" I pressed. Dr. Kellerman looked up from his cards. "Unofficially? We're trying to break something." "Break what?" "Ever heard of the firmament?" I shook my head. "It's from Genesis. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters above." Most people take it as metaphor, but some folks upstairs think it might be literal. "You're saying there's an actual barrier above Earth?" "I'm saying," Dr. Kellerman replied carefully, "there are things about our atmosphere that textbooks don't explain, and we're going to find out what happens when you hit them with a nuke." 3 days later, I was awakened at 5 a.m. by a voice over the loudspeaker. All personnel, this is a drill. Repeat, this is a drill. Code glass curtain is now in effect. Report to your assigned stations. Do not look at the sky. I repeat, do not look at the sky. I threw on my uniform and sprinted to the telemetry station, where Dr. Hawthorne was already working with the brisk precision of someone who had done this many times before. "Is this really just a drill?" I asked. "No," he replied, not even looking up. "The real test is in 3 days. This is just so no one panics when the sky starts falling." What I learned over the following days about Operation Fishbowl would change my understanding of reality forever. They were planning to detonate a 1.4 megaton nuclear warhead, 250 miles above Earth's surface, higher than any weapon had ever been exploded. The stated purpose? To study its effects on communications and possibly disable enemy satellites. But from the hushed conversations between scientists and officers, I could tell the truth ran much deeper. The more I listened, the more I realized we weren't being told the full story. They kept referencing vertical containment analysis and atmospheric penetration protocols, terms I had never heard in connection with standard nuclear testing. They spoke of barrier resistance and firmament interaction procedures. It wasn't just technical jargon. There was a tone of caution, even fear, beneath it all. What disturbed me most was the fixation on avoiding the sky. Every single person on the island had been warned not to look up during the detonation. We were told the flash would be so bright it could blind us, even with eyes closed. But something in the way they talked made it clear. Blindness was the least of our worries. "Whatever you do, Doctor," Hawthorne told me the morning of July 9th. "Don't look up. Not during the blast, not for 10 minutes afterward. Keep your focus on the instruments and your mind on the work. And if you hear anything coming from above, ignore it." "What kind of sounds?" I asked. "The kind that don't belong in our world." July 9th, 1962, started like any other day in hell. The sun rose over Johnston Atoll at 0630 hours, casting a sickly red hue across the runways, like dried blood on concrete. I'd already been up since 0400, running final checks on the telemetry systems and trying to ignore the ever-present weight of dread in my gut. The detonation was scheduled for 0900 hours. At 0800, everyone was ordered to their designated stations. I was assigned to the main telemetry bunker, an armored concrete shell built into a low rise at the island's northern edge. No windows. The only light came from radar displays glowing green and occasional blinks from indicator lights. Inside were Dr. Hawthorne, Bobby Chen, and 2 techs I didn't know. All of us wore standard radiation badges, but Hawthorne also had a strange extra device clipped to his belt, something resembling a Geiger counter but more advanced. Multiple dials, extra readouts. I had no idea what it measured. "All right, gentlemen," Dr. Hawthorne said, voice oddly calm. "To minus 10 minutes, remember your training. Monitor your stations, record everything. And whatever you do, do not look up." At T-minus 5 minutes, a voice crackled over the comms. "Glass curtain control to all stations. Starfish Prime is go for detonation. Confirm sealed status. Telemetry Alpha, sealed and ready. Photography Bravo, sealed and ready. Atmospheric Charlie, sealed and ready." And so on. The island confirmed, station by station. I locked my eyes on the radar screen, watching its steady sweep. The instruments were quiet. Air pressure, normal. Nothing out of place. T-minus 60 seconds. T-minus 30 seconds. T-minus 10. I counted down in my head, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. At exactly 0900 hours, reality shifted. Even through thick concrete, even with my eyes fixed straight ahead, I saw the flash. It didn't come from outside. It came from everywhere. An intense white burst that lit up the inside of my skull like someone had flicked on the universe. My dosimeter began clicking rapidly, then shifted to a steady, high-pitched tone that drilled into my jaw. But that wasn't the worst part. For a brief moment, maybe 3 or 4 seconds, I forgot where I was. I forgot the island, the bunker, my name. I wasn't David Rowe anymore. I was floating, suspended above the earth, far above anything human. And I could see, God help me, I could see. Jesus Christ, Bobby Chen whispered, look at the radar. I blinked hard, trying to shake the vision. When I finally focused on the radar screen, my mind rebelled at what it saw. Instead of the usual horizon curve and distant aircraft blips, the display showed a series of concentric rings, radiating outward from a point directly above us, ripples in a still pond. But these ripples weren't just spreading, they were bouncing, reflecting, as if they'd hit something solid up there. "Are you getting this?" Dr. Hawthorne asked, voice tight. "Yes, sir," I said, "but I don't understand it." "None of us do. Just keep recording." The radio crackled. "All stations, this is glass curtain control. Detonation confirmed at 250 miles altitude. Initial radiation levels within expectations. Atmospheric disturbance is significant." Significant? That was an understatement. The readings were going wild. Magnetic sensors fluctuated beyond physical norms. Pressure data suggested that the very air was shaking. Comms were barely working. Glass curtain control was nearly drowned in static. Then the sound began. 5 minutes after detonation, a hum, low, slow, almost below the range of hearing, crept in from above. It was more a feeling than a sound, like standing next to a giant generator, but it intensified, deeper, louder, until it shook inside my bones. "You hear that?" I asked. Dr. Hawthorne nodded grimly. "Yeah, we heard it during the earlier tests too. Usually lasts just under an hour." "What causes it?" He hesitated. "We're not sure, but we have theories." It continued for 57 minutes. Then, just like that, it stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse. It felt like the whole world had gone still, waiting for something unspeakable. Within hours, reports started coming in. Radio interference stretched as far as Australia. Satellites lost contact. And strangest of all, people in Samoa, thousands of miles south, reported auroras lighting up the night sky. But the truly bizarre accounts came from commercial aircraft in the area. 3 separate pilots reported seeing what they described as a crack in the sky. A dark line stretching from one horizon to the other, visible for minutes before fading. When I asked Dr. Hawthorne about it, he shook his head. "Optical illusions," he said. "The electromagnetic pulse can cause visual distortions. Nothing to worry about." But I could tell he didn't believe it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I returned to that vision. The earth from above. A presence I couldn't explain. Something that should never be seen. By 0300, I gave up trying and walked outside. The sky was clear. For the first time since arriving, I looked up, and my blood froze. The stars were wrong. I'd studied astronomy as a kid. I knew the constellations by heart. But what I saw wasn't right. Orion was tilted. The Big Dipper was stretched. And there were stars where there shouldn't be stars, new lights in dark places. I stared for 20 minutes, trying to reason it away. Fatigue, stress, optical illusion. But the longer I looked, the more convinced I became that something up there had changed. That's when I saw Marcus Webb. He was about 50 yards away, setting up a tripod-mounted camera aimed straight at the sky. He wore thick, tinted goggles and moved with quiet intent, like someone on a mission. I approached. "Working late?" I asked. He jumped. "Jesus, Dave, you scared me." "Couldn't sleep either." "Yeah, something like that." He gestured to the camera. Dr. Hawthorne wanted shots of the night sky, routine atmospheric monitoring. "At 3 in the morning?" "Best time for low interference." I peered at the device. It wasn't military issue. It had filters and lenses unlike anything I'd seen, clearly customized to capture specific wavelengths. "What are you really looking for?" He hesitated, then leaned in. "Officially, auroras, EMP traces. And unofficially, we're trying to find cracks. Cracks in what? In whatever we hit up there." July 12th, 1962. The days that followed the detonation of Starfish Prime were unlike anything I'd ever seen in the military. The blast's effects extended far beyond expectations, and the island pulsed with activity as scientists tried to make sense of the data. Radio systems remained erratic. Long-range comms failed repeatedly, with signals bouncing unpredictably. Something in the upper atmosphere was reflecting them. Ships reported navigational problems. Aircraft were forced to land due to sudden electronic failures. But that was only the beginning. 3 days after the detonation, the first reports of dead birds began to surface. They were found floating in the lagoon around Johnston Atoll, dozens of them, lifeless, with no obvious cause of death. The base veterinarian, who examined them, reported no signs of disease or physical trauma. They hadn't been injured, they had simply died mid-flight, dropping from the sky like stones. Probably just confused by the electromagnetic pulse, Dr. Hawthorne explained when I asked. Birds use the Earth's magnetic field for navigation. The detonation disrupted their natural compass. But I had seen disoriented birds before. This wasn't that. These birds hadn't been lost. They had been shut off, instantly, simultaneously, as if someone had flipped a switch. The next day brought something even stranger. A Navy patrol vessel, stationed 50 miles south of Johnston Atoll, reported that their radar had detected a solid object hovering roughly 200 meters above the Earth's surface. The object appeared stationary and circular, with a diameter spanning several hundred miles. "Atmospheric anomaly," Dr. Hawthorne said when I asked him about it. The detonation created a layer of ionized particles. It's reflecting radar signals. It'll dissipate in a few days, but it didn't dissipate. If anything, it grew more defined. By July 15th, radar installations as far away as Hawaii were detecting the same anomaly, a solid, circular object suspended high above the Central Pacific. It was clearly visible on radar, yet completely invisible to the naked eye. That's when things began to spiral. On the morning of July 16th, I was performing routine telemetry calibrations when I noticed something strange on the radar display. The usual arc representing Earth's curvature was absent, replaced by a pattern of straight lines, sharp, structured, and unmistakably artificial. I adjusted the controls, assuming it was interference from residual ionization, but the pattern held. In fact, it sharpened. It looked like a grid, a massive hexagonal structure overlaid across the radar field. "Hey, Bobby," I called out to Chen, who was working nearby on the radio equipment. "Come look at this." He walked over, and the second he saw the screen, his face went pale. "What the hell is that?" "I was hoping you could tell me." We stood there for several minutes, staring in silence. The pattern pulsed and shifted slightly, like a living circuit board rendered in green phosphor. It was mesmerizing and terrifying. because it meant there was something up there, something designed, something not natural. "Should we report this?" Bobby asked. Before I could respond, Dr. Hawthorne appeared behind us. "Report what?" he asked. I gestured toward the radar screen. "This pattern. It's been showing for the past 20 minutes. Dr. Hawthorne's expression changed immediately. He went pale, his jaw tightening. "Turn it off." "Sir, turn off the radar, now." "Is something wrong with the equipment?" "There's something wrong with what it's detecting. Turn it off." I complied. The screen went black. The pattern vanished. Dr. Hawthorne stood there for a moment, staring at the blank display. Then he turned to us with a weariness I hadn't seen before. "Gentlemen, I need to know I can trust you. What you just saw is classified at the highest level. You will not include it in your reports. You will not discuss it, and I strongly recommend you don't dwell on it." "Yes, sir," Bobby replied instantly. "Sir," I said, "what exactly did we just see?" Dr. Hawthorne didn't answer at first. Then, quietly, "Something that shouldn't exist. Something that's always been there. But we only learned how to see it when we hit it hard enough." That night, I couldn't get the image of that hexagonal grid out of my mind. It felt familiar, like I had seen something like it before, but I couldn't place it. I lay in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning. We were told we were studying the effects of high-altitude nuclear detonations on communications and satellites. But I no longer believed that was the truth. The equipment wasn't right. The people weren't right. And their reactions, the fear behind the eyes, told me they were hunting for something. Something they had finally found. At around 0200 hours, I made a decision. I had to see what was inside that hangar. I slipped out of my bunk and moved through the base in shadows, avoiding the patrols I had spent the past week memorizing. The hangar sat at the southern edge of the island, surrounded by twin fences and guarded by men who clearly weren't taking any chances. But I'd been sneaking around bases since I was a private. I knew how to stay unseen. At the back of the hangar, a drainage ditch ran close to the fence. It reeked and was half full of stagnant water, but it gave me cover. I crawled through the muck until I reached a place where I could see through a gap in the inner fence. The hangar had a small rear window. Through it, I saw everything. It wasn't a storage facility or weapons depot. The space inside was filled with scientific equipment. Not military cameras, but massive machines, more akin to observatory instruments. Telescopes, spectrometers, exotic sensors I couldn't identify, but the walls. Every wall of that hangar was covered with photographs. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Arranged with surgical precision, and every photo showed the sky above Johnston Atoll, but not as we saw it with our eyes. These images revealed patterns, structures, vast, organized geometry, lines of force, and what looked unmistakably like that same hexagonal grid from the radar, and within some of those photographs, cracks. Thin black lines splitting through the pattern like fractures in glass. In some, they were tiny, barely visible. In others, wide enough to reveal darkness beyond. Not the darkness of space, but something else. Something alien. I was still processing the images when I noticed the label on a nearby cabinet. Firmament Reaction Event. Prism 6. There it was again. Firmament, the ancient word. The supposed dome that separated the waters above from the waters below, the ceiling of the world. I was about to lean closer when I heard footsteps approaching. I dropped flat into the ditch, barely breathing. 2 guards passed by, crunching along the gravel. "Still can't believe what's in those photos," one said. "Believe it," the other replied. I've been here since the first test in April. Every time we hit it, it gets a little weaker, and every time it weakens, we see more of what's on the other side. What do you think is over there? I don't know, and I don't want to know, but I'll say this. It's been watching us for a long time, and now that we've cracked the shell, it's watching us more closely. They moved on. I waited 10 more minutes before crawling back the way I came. I didn't sleep that night, because I finally understood we weren't just testing nuclear weapons. We were striking at something ancient, something that had been keeping us in, or keeping something else out, and every test made it weaker. The only question was, what would happen when it finally broke? July 18th, 1962, 9 days after detonation. I woke at 04:30 to the sound of sirens. Not the usual alerts, but a jarring, dissonant wail that seemed to come from all directions at once. I threw on my uniform and ran outside, expecting a fire or maybe a containment breach. Instead, I found the entire base gathered in the compound, staring upward. The aurora was back, but this time, it wasn't the same. The sky over Johnston Atoll shimmered with impossible color, deep purples, electric greens, radiant blues that pulsed and flowed like a living organism. But more than that, within the shifting lights I saw forms, shapes, geometric patterns, moving, folding, unfolding. They weren't random, they weren't natural, they were communicating. Beautiful, isn't it? Dr. Hawthorne appeared beside me, but his voice was tight, uncertain. What's causing it? Secondary effects, he said quickly. The electromagnetic disruption from the blast is still stabilizing, just a side effect of the magnetic field lines realigning. But even as he spoke, I could tell he didn't believe it. The lights were too deliberate, too intelligent. Dr. Hawthorne, I said carefully, what are we really doing here? He didn't answer at first, just stood, watching the sky. Finally, he spoke. We're explorers, Mr. Rowe. We're trying to understand the world we live in, and sometimes that means pushing boundaries that maybe shouldn't be pushed. And if we push too far, then we find out what's on the other side. The aurora lasted for 3 hours. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the aurora faded. But the effect lingered throughout the day. Personnel reported unusual sensations, a sense of being watched, inexplicable sounds, and fleeting glimpses of movement in their peripheral vision. The most disturbing account came from Dr. Kellerman, a physicist who had once worked on the Manhattan Project. He claimed he saw shapes in the aurora, humanoid figures watching the island from above. Probably just pareidolia, Dr. Hawthorne said when I asked him about it. People often see patterns where none exist. Stress can cause hallucinations. But I'd seen Dr. Kellerman that morning, seen the way he looked at the sky. That wasn't the face of a man experiencing a hallucination. It was the look of someone who had seen something that shattered everything he believed about reality. That afternoon, I was in the telemetry station when Bobby Chen burst through the door, his face pale with a strange mix of fear and excitement. Dave, you need to hear this. Now. He led me to the communications room where he'd been monitoring regional transmissions across the Pacific. The radio was alive with static, but buried in the interference, there was something else, a rhythmic signal. It sounded almost like music. It started about an hour ago, Bobby said. It's coming from directly overhead, same frequency as our standard comms, but the signal's stronger than anything we've ever recorded. I listened closely. The pattern was hauntingly beautiful, but it had an unnatural quality that made my skin crawl and my teeth hurt. Did you report this to Dr. Hawthorne? I tried. He told me to stop monitoring that frequency and to stick to the standard protocols. But you didn't stop. No, I didn't. And Dave, I think there's something else. I think there's a message in the signal. The structure's too complex to be random. We spent the next hour trying to decode it, but it was beyond us. The pattern was layered, dense with harmonics, overtones, and a level of technical intricacy that seemed impossible. "Bobby," I said at last, "I need to tell you something. Something I saw in that restricted hangar." I told him everything, the photographs, the geometric structures, the cracks in what had been labeled the firmament, the guard's conversation, and my growing certainty that Operation Fishbowl wasn't about nuclear weapons at all. "So, what are we doing here?" he asked. "I think we're trying to break through something that's been protecting us, or containing us, or both, and I think it's working." That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to document what was happening on Johnston Atoll, no matter the consequences. I found an old camera in the equipment storage room and began photographing everything I could: unusual telemetry readings, the geometric radar patterns, and most importantly, the sky. Through the lens, the sky above Johnston Atoll was not what it seemed. It wasn't just air and stars. It was full of structure. Through the camera, I could see the hexagonal grid again, far more clearly than on radar. It stretched from horizon to horizon, vast and symmetrical, unmistakably artificial. The geometry was too clean, too precise, and scattered across the pattern were cracks, thin, dark fractures slicing through the grid like broken glass. Some were hairline splits, others wide enough that I could see what lay beyond. And what I saw didn't belong in this world. I took dozens of photos, using different filters and exposure settings to capture every possible detail. Some images showed the pattern, others, the cracks, and a few, the ones that would haunt me for the rest of my life, showed what was behind the cracks. It wasn't the void of space. It was something else. A darkness with depth, texture, something that felt alive. And inside that darkness, there were shapes, geometric forms that didn't obey any known rules of physics, moving with unsettling grace and intelligence. But most disturbing of all was the feeling that they were looking back. On July 20th, Dr. Hawthorne summoned me to his office for what he called a routine progress review. But the moment I stepped in, I knew this wasn't routine. 2 men in civilian clothes sat beside his desk. They had the cold, unreadable posture of intelligence officers. "Mr. Rowe," Dr. Hawthorne said, "these gentlemen are from Washington. They have a few questions about your work." The older one introduced himself as Mr. Smith, clearly a pseudonym. He was tall, silver-haired, and his eyes were like ice. The younger one, Mr. Jones, never said a word. "We understand you've taken a unique interest in your duties," Smith said, opening a folder and spreading several photographs across the desk. My photographs. "These were found in your quarters during a routine security inspection." My blood went cold. "I can explain. I'm sure you can, but I don't think you realize the severity of what you've done. These images capture highly classified material. If they ended up in the wrong hands, the consequences could be severe." He studied me. "Do you know what you're looking at in these photos, Mr. Rowe?" I hesitated. "The ceiling of the world?" Smith nodded slowly. "Exactly. And thanks to our work here, you're also looking at the cracks we've made in it." He leaned forward, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Do you know what the firmament is, Mr. Rowe? The Bible mentions it. Some kind of barrier between the waters above and below. Correct? And for thousands of years it has kept us safe, contained, hidden. It kept us from seeing what's really out there." He gestured to the photographs. "But that's changing. With each detonation, we weaken the barrier. With every crack, we create a window into what we were never meant to see. What's on the other side? Intelligence, purpose, awareness, things that have been watching us since before we existed. And now that we've fractured the shell, they're paying closer attention. Smith stood and looked out the window at the sea. There's another test tomorrow night. But this one is different. We'll focus all our energy on a single point. If our calculations are correct, it will create a breach large enough for direct contact. Contact with what? Whatever's up there. Your job, Mr. Rowe, is to document every signal, every anomaly, every visual, because what we learn could determine the fate of human civilization. I left the office in a daze. Everything I thought I knew about Operation Fishbowl had been a lie. We weren't testing weapons. We were breaking through something that had shielded humanity for millennia. That night, I didn't sleep. I thought of the photographs, the patterns, the impossible shapes, and the presence behind the cracks. Whatever it was intelligent, and it was watching. Around 0300 hours, I heard it again, the low-frequency hum. But this time, it wasn't just a vibration. It sounded like voices. Not speaking aloud, but inside my mind. I went to the window. The sky was clear. The stars were still wrong. Then, they began to move. Not drifting, not orbiting, shifting, intentionally, rapidly, forming precise patterns in the sky. Within minutes, the stars had aligned into a perfect hexagonal grid. And in the center of that grid, a dark circle appeared, a hole in the stars, pulsing with inner light. And from that darkness, shapes emerged, impossible forms, alive with intent and motion. They moved across the sky like mathematics made flesh, crystalline, brilliant, and painful to perceive. And with their motion came language, not sound, but thought. They were communicating. I couldn't understand the words, but I felt their meaning. Urgency, curiosity, warning. The vision lasted 10 minutes. Then the stars returned to their usual positions, and the sky was still again. But I knew what I had seen. The barrier was breaking, and something was reaching out. The second test was scheduled for 2100 hours on July 21st. This time, the warhead was different. It wouldn't detonate traditionally. Instead, it would release all its energy in a single, concentrated beam. Dr. Hawthorne called it a drill-tip warhead, a device engineered to punch through the firmament, intentionally. I spent the day prepping the telemetry equipment, but my mind was elsewhere. On the vision, the voices, the movement in the sky. They knew we were coming. At 1800 hours, I was still in the telemetry bunker when Marcus Webb appeared in the doorway, dark circles under his eyes, hands trembling with caffeine and nerves. "Dave," he said, "I need to show you something." He led me to a makeshift darkroom behind the bunker. The walls were covered in photographs, night sky images he had developed over the last few days. "I've been processing the plates," he said. "And I found something." He handed me a photo. It showed the sky above Johnston Atoll, but not as the eye could see. It showed the grid, clearer than ever. But more than that, it showed the cracks. Dozens of them. Widening, spreading, fracturing the sky like a shattered dome, like a spider web. "When was this taken?" I asked. 3 days ago, Marcus replied. "But look at this one." He handed me another photograph, taken the previous night. The cracks were larger, more numerous, and in several places I could see straight through them into the darkness beyond. "It's getting worse," Marcus said. Every day the cracks spread a little further. "And, Dave, I think I know why. He pulled out a folder stamped classified, eyes only, and opened it. Inside was a series of technical diagrams, schematics of the drill tip warhead. The level of precision in the design was striking. This wasn't a device built for destruction. It was a tool, engineered with exacting care. "They're not trying to break the firmament," Marcus said. "They're trying to open a door." Before I could respond, the lights in the storage room flickered, then went out. We were swallowed by darkness, save for the dim red glow of the darkroom safe light. And in that glow, I saw something that made my heart stop. The photographs on the wall had changed. The static geometric patterns and cracks were now in motion. The shapes behind the cracks were shifting, expanding, as though they were getting closer to the barrier from the other side. "Do you see that?" I whispered. Marcus nodded slowly, his face pale in the dim red light. "They know we're here. They know what we're trying to do." A moment later, the lights returned. The photographs reverted to their original state. But the feeling remained, that we were no longer just observing something alien. We were being watched, not just by the things beyond the firmament, but by the firmament itself. At 20:30 hours, all personnel were ordered to their assigned stations for the second test. I returned to the telemetry bunker with Dr. Hawthorne, Bobby Chen, and Dr. Kellerman. The air inside was charged, thick with dread and a strange electric anticipation. "Gentlemen," Dr. Hawthorne said, "tonight we make history. Tonight we open a door that has remained shut since the dawn of time. Whatever you see, whatever you hear, remember this: you are witnessing the next stage of human evolution." At 20:50 hours, the countdown began. But something was different. The instruments were already showing intense activity in the upper atmosphere. Electromagnetic readings spiked. Resonant patterns hinted that something was already happening above us. "You seeing this?" Dr. Kellerman asked, his voice tight. "Seeing what?" "There's something up there, something massive. It's like the entire firmament is vibrating." I checked my console, and he was right. The data showed clear harmonic patterns. It looked as if the geometric structure in the sky was resonating, like a colossal instrument being played by invisible hands. To minus 60 seconds. The vibrations intensified. The entire bunker began to shake, as though the island itself was responding to whatever loomed overhead. T-minus 30 seconds. A sound began to rise. Not the deep, oppressive hum we'd heard before, but something else. Music. It was haunting. Complex harmonies that seemed to be sung in a language of mathematics and pure tone. It was beautiful and terrifying. T-minus 10 seconds. The sound grew louder, layering into a chorus of impossible voices, echoing through the walls, through our bones. A glow began to seep through the concrete, soft, pulsing light that moved in rhythm with the singing. 5, 2, 1. The drill tip warhead detonated at exactly 2100 hours, 250 miles above Johnston Atoll. But this was no blinding flash. This was different. The light built gradually, like a reverse sunrise growing brighter and more vivid until it filled the sky. Then I saw it. Through the walls, through the roof, through the fabric of the world. The firmament. Alive. Not a barrier, not a ceiling. A vast, geometric entity, breathing with light and motion. A living structure humming with purpose. And at its center, where the warhead had struck, a hole had opened. Not a crack this time, but a doorway. And something was coming through. It was a being of light and form. Pure geometry and motion, descending from the rift above. It moved with precision, with intent, and it was both beautiful and unbearable to witness. As it hovered above the earth, I could feel its voice inside my head, thoughts too complex for language, messages conveyed in shape, color, and vibration. But one thing was unmistakably clear. We have been waiting. The entity hovered over Johnston Atoll for exactly 17 seconds. During that time, every instrument on the island went berserk. Radiation levels spiked. Magnetic fields surged. Even the air seemed to tremble with some foreign energy. Then, just as quickly, the entity withdrew. The hole in the firmament closed, the light faded, the music stopped. We were alone again. But the silence wasn't the same. It was the silence of a world that had changed. In the days that followed, the official report described the test as a partial success with unexpected anomalies. Radiation levels were within acceptable parameters. Electromagnetic effects were consistent with prior data. No unusual readings, no contact, nothing to report. But we knew the truth. Dr. Kellerman was the first to break. 3 days after the test, he was found in his quarters, scribbling frantically in his logbook. There's something on the other side. There's something on the other side. There's something on the other side. They sedated him and removed him from the island within hours. Marcus Webb followed next. He became obsessed with his photographs, developing and redeveloping the same plates over and over. He claimed he could see faces in the geometric patterns, that the beings were trying to communicate through the light and shadow. One night he vanished, along with his equipment and negatives. The official line said he'd suffered a breakdown and had been evacuated to a psychiatric facility. But I saw the men in civilian clothes who came for him, the same men who had once questioned me. Bobby Chen lasted longer, but eventually he broke too. He started hearing voices in the static. Not the singing from the second test, but something darker, something screaming. I found him in the comms room one morning, twisting the dials, muttering to himself, "They're angry. We broke their house, and now they're angry." By afternoon he was gone. That left only me, Dr. Hawthorne, and a few others. Those who hadn't seen what we saw, or those who were simply better at pretending it hadn't happened. But Dr. Hawthorne was unraveling too. He'd lost weight. His hands trembled. And sometimes I caught him staring into the sky with the empty look of someone who had glimpsed too much. On August 15th, exactly 1 month after the second test, he called me into his office. I expected another briefing. Instead, I found him pacing, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the desk. "Sit down, Ro," he said without looking up. "We need to talk." I sat. He continued pacing for several minutes, then stopped at the window, looking out over the ocean. "Do you know what we've done?" he asked. "Sir? Do you understand what we've unleashed?" I decided to be honest. "I think we opened a door that should have stayed closed." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "A door, yes, that's one word for it. We opened a path into another realm, a world parallel to ours, a realm of energy, of mathematics, inhabited by entities that have watched us since the beginning. What do they want? I don't know, but they're not happy." He turned toward me. The firmament wasn't just a barrier, Ro, it was protection, a cage. It kept us from them, and it kept them from us. He paused. "There's going to be a third test, October 12th, and this one is going to tear the firmament wide open. Permanently. Can't you stop it? Stop it?" He laughed again. There was hysteria in it now. "I'm not in charge. I never was. The people behind this, they know exactly what they're doing. They want contact. They believe they can harness what's on the other side, that they can control it." He stared at me, eyes wide. "They don't understand. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. That night, I made a decision. I was going to escape Johnston Atoll. I was going to take the evidence, and I was going to tell the world. I spent the next week preparing. I copied the most critical documents, technical specs for the drill tip warhead, initial readings from both detonations. I also stole one of Marcus's undeveloped photographic plates, the one that showed the hole in the firmament most clearly. My plan was simple: wait for the monthly supply flight, sneak into the cargo bay, and hide until we reached Hawaii. But the night before the flight, they came for me. I woke to the sound of footsteps outside, not the casual rhythm of patrol, but the silent, focused cadence of men with a mission. I had just enough time to slip the photographic plate into my sock before the door burst open. Mr. Smith and Mr. Jones stood in the doorway. 2 armed guards flanked them. Smith held a syringe filled with clear liquid. "Time for debriefing, Mr. Rowe," he said calmly. I ran, but the guards were faster. They tackled me, held me down, and Smith plunged the syringe into my neck. The drug hit fast, a wave of warmth, fog, and weight. And then, nothing. "Don't worry," Mr. Smith said as my vision began to blur. "This won't hurt. You'll just forget a few things. Unimportant things. Classified things." But the drug didn't work as well as they had hoped. Maybe it was adrenaline, maybe sheer determination. But somehow I managed to hold on to most of my memories. The details were hazy, but the essentials remained vivid. The geometric patterns in the sky, the cracks in the firmament, and the entities that exist beyond the barrier. I was flown off Johnston Atoll the next morning. Officially, I was discharged from the Air Force due to psychological stress related to prolonged deployment in a hostile environment. My security clearance was revoked, my service records were sealed, and I was issued a stern warning about the consequences of discussing my experiences with unauthorized individuals. They thought they had silenced me. They were wrong. I spent the next 25 years trying to reconstruct what had really happened at Johnston Atoll and what it meant for the rest of humanity. I pored over everything I could find on Operation Fishbowl, studied declassified reports, and tracked down former personnel who had been stationed there during the summer of 1962. Most of them were dead. Suicides, freak accidents, sudden illnesses that the government attributed to delayed radiation exposure. The few survivors I managed to find had either been subjected to the same memory suppression techniques I had or were so traumatized that they refused to speak about it at all. But I uncovered enough to confirm what I already knew. Operation Fishbowl had never been about testing nuclear weapons. It was about breaching the firmament, about making contact with the intelligences that live beyond it. The third test was conducted as scheduled on October 12, 1962, just days before the Cuban Missile Crisis pushed the world to the brink of nuclear war. According to the official report, it was another partial success, but I know the truth. I know that the third test created a permanent breach, a doorway, a rift that has remained open ever since. The evidence is all around us, if you know how to see it. The spike in UFO sightings beginning in late 1962, the geometric anomalies that sometimes appear in the sky, the growing number of people who report seeing impossible shapes, hearing voices that speak in mathematics and harmonic frequencies. They are still up there, beyond the firmament, watching us through the cracks we made. And they are not pleased. I've hidden this manuscript where it will eventually be found, along with the single photographic plate I managed to save from Johnston Atoll. The plate shows the firmament as it truly is, not a simple barrier, but a living structure. And in the center of the image, plainly visible, is the hole we punched through with our drill tip warhead. Behind that hole lies a darkness unlike anything found in space. And within that darkness, shapes, forms that defy understanding. Watching, waiting. The government has known the truth since 1962. They've buried the evidence, silenced the witnesses, and maintained the fiction that Operation Fishbowl was a routine high-altitude nuclear test. But the truth has a way of surfacing. And when it does, when the world finally learns what we unleashed in the summer of 1962, I just hope it isn't too late to seal the door we opened. They told us it was just a test, but what they were really testing was the sky itself, and now that we've cracked it, something is looking back. Something that was never meant to share our world. God help us all. Recovered journal entry. Classification redacted. Subject: Eli Granger, independent journalist. Date range: July 15th to 18th, 2023. Location: Bohemian Grove, Monte Rio, California. The following document was recovered from an encrypted server farm in Iceland. The journalist's current whereabouts remain unknown. My name is Eli Granger, and I'm writing this because I may not live long enough to say it out loud. What I saw in the redwoods of Northern California will follow me to my grave, whenever that comes. It began 3 weeks ago with an email that shouldn't have existed. I was in my cramped Oakland apartment, nursing my third cup of coffee, scrolling through encrypted message boards where whistleblowers sometimes surfaced. My secure inbox pinged. The sender's address was a random string of characters routed through 7 different proxy servers. No subject line. Just an attachment and 4 lines of text. You want truth? Go to the redwoods. Bring a black suit and a quiet soul. July 15th and 18th. The fire reveals all. The attachment was a high-resolution scan of what appeared to be a guest registry for Bohemian Grove, that infamous all-male retreat where the world's most powerful figures allegedly gather each summer to commune with nature. I'd reported on the Grove before, mostly second-hand accounts and grainy photos from the 1980s. But this was different. The names on the list chilled me. Former presidents, sitting senators, defense contractors I'd been investigating for years, CEOs of major tech firms, pharmaceutical giants, media moguls who shape public perception across entire continents, all scheduled to attend something called the Midsummer Encampment. At the bottom of the scan was a forged access pass with my name and photo, a professionally edited headshot I'd never uploaded anywhere, digitally altered to show me in a black suit and tie. The name read Edmund Gray, logistics consultant, Prometheus Industries. Someone with serious power wanted me inside. The question was, why? I should have deleted the email and gone back to writing about corporate tax loopholes and city council corruption. Safe stories. Stories that didn't get people killed. Instead, I packed a black suit and drove north to Sonoma County. The road to Monte Rio winds through some of California's most breathtaking scenery. Old-growth redwoods stretching toward a canopy so dense it turns day to dusk. The sort of place you expect to find organic farms or spiritual retreats, not secret gatherings of the global elite. But I'd learned during my Navy intelligence days, the most dangerous truths are often hidden in the most peaceful places. I booked a room at a roadside motel in Guerneville and scoped the grove that evening. 2,000 acres of forest, ringed by razor wire-topped fencing. Motion sensors in the trees. Surveillance cameras every 50 feet. The main gate manned by guards who looked more like Delta Force than private contractors. Black fatigues, military posture, eyes like stone. The pass worked. Too well. They scanned it, checked the photo, and waved me in with barely a nod. Either the forger was a genius, or someone high up wanted me there. Neither possibility made me feel safer. Inside, the grove matched what I'd read. Winding gravel paths, rustic lodges named things like Caveman's Den, Owl's Nest, and Dragon's Lair. The setting was postcard beautiful, but something about it felt deeply wrong. The other guests, they weren't normal people. Not in behavior, not in presence. These were men used to absolute control. They wore golf polos and boat shoes by day, but I overheard their whispers as I passed. The Shanghai index will drop 17%. Tell the secretary, Operation Nightfall is approved. Media blackout will hold for 72 hours, I posed, as a logistics consultant, clipboard in hand. My phone had been confiscated at the gate and replaced with a sanitized device. No internet, no GPS, just a glorified camera. Rich men are used to ignoring the help. That made it easy to move unnoticed. But something else stood out. Symbols. Owls. Everywhere. Carved into trees, built into bench designs, painted discreetly onto cabin doors. Not whimsical or charming. These owls were stylized, angular, with eyes that followed you. The largest stood 40 feet tall, stone, silent, perched on a man-made island in the lake at the grove's center. Even in daylight, it radiated cold menace. Beautiful, isn't it? I turned. A man in his 70s was watching me, impeccably dressed, silver hair, pale blue eyes, almost translucent. "The Owl of Bohemia," he said, stepping beside me. "She's been watching this place for over a century. Some say it's symbolic, others know better." "Know better how?" I asked, instantly regretting it. I was supposed to be invisible, unremarkable. The old man smiled, revealing teeth far too white and perfect for someone his age. "You'll see tonight, Mr. Gray. The cremation of care waits for no man. Not even consultants." He turned and walked away before I could say another word, leaving me standing alone beside the great owl statue, wondering how much of my cover had already been compromised. As twilight settled over the grove that evening, everything changed. The casual friendliness of the day vanished, replaced by a heavy, ritualistic intensity. Men emerged from their cabins dressed in dark robes with deep hoods that obscured their faces. Some carried torches. Others bore strange ceremonial objects I couldn't identify. I found a robe folded neatly in my assigned cabin, along with a note. "Attendance is mandatory. Silence is sacred. The owl sees all." What I witnessed that night will haunt me for the rest of my life. As darkness fell, hundreds of robed figures made their way through the forest, converging silently on the lake where the towering owl statue stood sentinel. The flicker of torchlight glimmered through the trees like malevolent fireflies. The only sounds were footsteps on gravel and the whisper of robes brushing bark. I followed them, hood up, head down. The robe smelled faintly of incense and something else, something organic, rotting. I couldn't place it, but the scent clung to me. We gathered in a natural amphitheater carved into the landscape. The owl's red eyes seemed to glow in the flickering light. A wooden boat had been placed at the water's edge. In it lay a small white-wrapped figure. At first, I thought it was an effigy, something symbolic, but the proportions were too precise. The weight distribution seemed too real. The cloth didn't drape like it was covering straw or sawdust. It clung, as if it had been wrapped around something solid. Then a figure stepped onto a raised platform beside the statue. Even hooded and veiled, I knew the voice. A former president, his image once broadcast nightly into homes across the nation. His voice echoed across the water, amplified by hidden speakers. "Brothers of the Grove," he intoned, "we gather once more beneath the ancient gaze of wisdom to perform the sacred rite that frees us from the burden of conscience." The crowd responded in unison. We banish care and cast it to the flames. Care, that pale and common thing that binds the hands of power. Care, that whispers doubt in the ears of decision. Care, that stays the sword of necessary action. Again the chorus. We banish care and cast it to the flames. The ritual continued for nearly an hour, an elaborate call and response laced with invocations to ancient deities I recognized from years of studying Middle Eastern mythology. Names like Moloch, the Carthaginian god of child sacrifice, and Enlil, the Mesopotamian lord of wind and divine authority. Deities no modern political figure should be invoking in the 21st century. But the most disturbing part wasn't the pagan references, or even the implications of child sacrifice. It was how casually they performed it. These were captains of industry, makers of laws, architects of civilization, yet they moved through this grotesque pantomime as though it were nothing more than a team-building exercise. The ceremony's climax came when the boat was pushed into the lake. Hidden jets of flame ignited around it, bathing the scene in an unnatural orange glow. The figure inside caught fire quickly. The cloth peeled away. And what lay beneath? I don't know. Maybe it was just a convincingly built mannequin, its movements caused by internal supports collapsing under the fire. Maybe the high-pitched whimpering was just gases escaping from synthetic materials. But the way some in the crowd openly wept, the way others raised their arms in ecstasy, it didn't feel like theater. As the flames died down, the crowd began to disperse. I turned to leave, but a hand landed firmly on my shoulder. "Mr. Gray." The old man again, still in his ceremonial robe. "You're invited to the inner circle gathering, a rare honor for a consultant." Before I could respond, two more figures appeared behind me. Not overtly threatening, but it was clear refusal wasn't an option. They led me away from the lake, off the main path, into a part of the forest not marked on any map. There, in a secluded clearing, perhaps 30 men stood around a fire pit carved directly into the bedrock. No torches, no theatrics. This was different, ancient, quietly terrifying. At midnight, the ritual began. The men had changed robes for masks, owl faces, carved from polished bone, with hollow eye sockets that stared without blinking. They moved in synchronized patterns, as though they had performed this rite for centuries. The man who had led the earlier ceremony stepped into the circle. Without his robes and presidential posture, he seemed diminished. Just another acolyte in service of powers older than nations. "Brothers of the inner grove," he said, "we gather to receive the wisdom of the ancient ones and to consecrate the plans that will shape the world's destiny." The response came in a language I didn't recognize, guttural, consonant-heavy, like it had been scraped from the bedrock of human consciousness. But my military training kicked in. I began to recognize patterns. This was Adian, a dead language believed to have originated in ancient Mesopotamia, lost for over 2,000 years. They were chanting names, offering sacrifices, swearing allegiance. Sigils were drawn in ash around the fire. Not random occult doodles. These were exact matches to glyphs I'd seen in declassified CIA documentation from Project MK-Ultra. That research had supposedly been abandoned in the 1970s, when it was just getting started. Apparently, it had only moved underground. The meeting went on for hours. Maps were unrolled, not of countries, but of resource fields, economic corridors, population clusters. In English and Adian, they laid out their plans. Conflicts to ignite, regimes to collapse, populations to pacify. And through it all, they didn't speak as patriots. They didn't even pretend to serve nations. They referred to themselves as servants, but not of any government. Servants of the Ancient Ones, preparing the world for their arrival. "The harvest approaches," one masked man said. "The sleepers must be awakened. The old seals must be broken." And the circle responded, "Let the work continue." I stayed just beyond the firelight, recording everything with a hidden audio device embedded in my shoe, and I realized this wasn't just conspiracy. It wasn't even political. It was a cult. These men believed, truly believed, that humanity existed to serve powers not of this world. And whether those powers were real or imagined didn't matter. The policies they were forming would affect billions, based on the whispered will of something that viewed us as cattle. The ritual concluded with each man drinking from a silver chalice and swearing individual pledges. The liquid looked black in the firelight. Several convulsed after drinking, eyes rolling back until only the whites were visible. As dawn neared, they removed their masks. I saw the faces: former presidents, sitting senators, military generals, Fortune 100 CEOs. They shook hands as if concluding a corporate deal, because in a sense they were. I made it back to my cabin as the first sunlight filtered through the redwoods, but I knew I couldn't stay much longer. Too many glances, too many veiled smiles. They knew I wasn't one of them, and they were letting me see just enough. But there was still one place I had to investigate before I left. Lodge of Styx, unauthorized access. The lodge marked Styx sat apart from the main camp, connected by a narrow service road that didn't appear on any guest map. I had noticed it during my first day's sweep of the grounds, but until now, I hadn't had a chance to approach. The building itself looked ordinary, wood construction, modest like the rest of the camp, but the security, anything but, biometric scanners, electromagnetic locks, heartbeat detection motion sensors capable of reading signatures from 50 feet away. Fortunately, my anonymous benefactor had anticipated this. Hidden in the lining of my jacket was a USB device disguised as a standard flash drive, containing intrusion software that rivaled anything I had seen in military operations. When plugged into the control panel beside the door, it created a 15-second blind spot in the system and bypassed the locks entirely. Whoever had arranged this knew exactly what they were doing. Inside, the lodge was a front. Behind a false wall, concealed by a decorative bookcase, was another access panel. Another blind code. Once inside, the deception fell away. Stone stairs led downward, deep into the bedrock beneath the grove. The walls were not modern. They had been carved, not constructed, ancient and unpolished. Electric lights had been added, but only to illuminate what already existed. And at the bottom of the stairs, a heavy oak door opened into a chamber that took my breath away. The room stretched far beyond what should have been possible, considering the lodge's footprint above. Stone shelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound journals, rolled documents, and artifacts spanning what appeared to be centuries. At the center of the chamber stood a massive table, carved from a single slab of black stone. Its surface was covered with maps, blueprints, and what looked like official government documents bearing real seals. I started with the journals, selecting one at random from a shelf labeled 1923 to 1945. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned, but the content was anything but quaint. The European situation proceeds according to plan. Our associates in Berlin understand their role, though they believe they serve the fatherland rather than the ancient ones. The sacrifice of the lesser peoples will provide the spiritual energy necessary for the next phase of the great work. Another journal, more recent, read, "Operation Mockingbird exceeds all expectations. The media outlets respond to our guidance without question. believing they serve journalistic integrity while actually perpetuating narratives required for population control. The sleeping masses accept whatever reality we provide. But it was the documents on the stone table that truly shattered my understanding of the world. Blueprints for the USA Patriot Act, dated 6 months before September 11, 2001. Battle plans for the invasion of Iraq, complete with fabricated intelligence about weapons of mass destruction. Early drafts of social media algorithms, not designed to connect but to divide users into manageable, predictable factions, and newer documents that made my skin crawl. Plans for a global pandemic response that emphasized control over public health. Blueprints for digital currency infrastructures, meant to eliminate financial privacy entirely. Population reduction strategies, cloaked in environmental policy language. But the most disturbing document of all was a roster of participants, dating back to the 1870s, when the Bohemian Club was first founded. Many of the names I recognized: industrialists, railroad tycoons, media barons. But some names dated back even further, centuries further. Either the records were wildly inaccurate, or some of these participants weren't entirely human. At the bottom of the most recent page, written in fresh ink, E. Granger, journalist, witnessed Inner Circle ceremony, July 16, 2023. Asset or liability. Recommend termination if no compliance by dawn, July 18th. They knew exactly who I was. They'd known the moment I arrived. The anonymous email, the forged credentials, the convenient access. It had all been a test. And I was failing. Somewhere in the chamber, a motion sensor pinged softly. Red lights blinked to life on the walls. In the distance, footsteps, heavy and deliberate, descending the stone stairwell. I stuffed as many documents into my jacket as I could. I scanned the chamber for another exit. There was only one, and it was about to be filled with people who definitely didn't want me leaving alive. The voices grew louder. Military cadence, short and precise. Tactical operators. Then, darkness. Total. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing the room in blood red. And in that instant between light and shadow, I heard something impossible. A voice, not in my ears, but in my mind. Run, little journalist. Run and tell the world what you've seen, but know that telling it will be your doom. The salvation of the world demands greater sacrifices than one man's life. When the red lights stabilized, a section of the stone wall had opened, revealing a narrow tunnel that led deeper into the earth. I didn't hesitate. Whoever, or whatever, had spoken to me was offering a chance. I took it. The tunnel beneath the grove was vast and old. Carved passages connected natural caves, forming a subterranean web that likely extended for miles. The walls were marked with symbols, older than the ones I'd seen at the ceremony, worn smooth by time or touch or something else entirely. I followed the main tunnel for what felt like hours, guided by faint phosphorescent moss glowing softly on the walls. Behind me, faint sounds of pursuit, voices, flashlights, the occasional static burst of a radio, but they were growing weaker. Maybe they couldn't find the entrance, or maybe they were afraid to follow. Eventually, the tunnel began sloping upward. I caught the scent of rain and green things. Life. I emerged through a narrow opening veiled by hanging vines, several miles from the main compound. Storm clouds had gathered. Thunder rumbled overhead. Rain began to fall. Perfect cover if I could reach my car before the perimeter expanded. But as I moved through the trees, I sensed I wasn't alone. Figures moved between the trunks, not the tactical teams I'd expected, but something stranger. They wore the owl masks from the Inner Circle, but their movements weren't human. too fluid, too synchronized, and their eyes glowed faintly. Soft, steady, unnatural. "The journalist sees too much," one of them said, the words somehow cutting through the storm. "The ancient ones are displeased," another replied, "but the compact must be honored. He was brought here for a purpose. Let him carry the message to the outer world. Let them know what awaits." I ran. Laughter echoed behind me. Not chasing me, not yet. It was the sound of predators watching prey that would tire soon enough. I reached my rental car just as the storm broke in full. Rain pounded the windshield as I sped into the night, sticking to back roads, avoiding every major highway. The documents I carried felt like they were burning against my chest. But I'd made it out. I had proof. Or so I thought. I uploaded everything to an offshore server in Iceland. Documents, audio, photos, field notes. I created multiple backup copies, distributed them across anonymous darknet repositories, encrypted everything with military-grade protocols. Within 6 hours, all of it was gone. Corrupted. Deleted. My apartment was raided while I uploaded files from an internet cafe. Nothing was stolen, but everything was destroyed. Laptop, phone, external drives, even the digital camera I'd hidden in a drawer, gone. The mainstream media ignored every inquiry. Even fringe sites that initially showed interest went silent. Message boards deleted any post related to Bohemian Grove within minutes. It was as if the internet itself had been scrubbed. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst were the dreams. Every night since, I've seen visions of the ancient ones. Vast, tentacled shapes that live between dimensions, feeding on suffering, whispering of a world they are preparing to inherit. They show me futures I wish I could unsee. Cities drowned beneath black oceans. Skies filled with howling winds. Humanity reduced to cattle. Sacrifice, worship, reaping. And they whispered to me, not as a hero or a rebel, not even as a victim, as a messenger. They allowed me to witness the ritual. They wanted me to understand their power, to carry their message into the world. Not to warn it, because that implies resistance, to break it, to hollow out hope, to murder belief in truth, to show people how powerless they really are. And the worst part, it's working. I'm writing this final entry from a motel room in Reno. I've been driving for 3 days, changing direction every few hours. But I know none of it matters. They're not hunting me. They don't need to. I'm already doing what they want, just by existing, just by remembering. The cremation of care wasn't just a ritual. It was a recruitment. And I wasn't an infiltrator, I was an initiate. Tonight I'll drive east, into the desert. Maybe I'll find a way to break the cycle. Or maybe I'll vanish into the dust and let the truth die with me. But if you're reading this, if somehow these words made it through the net of silence and fire, then remember, they call it the cremation of care. But what they really burn is conscience, and when the fire dies, the world grows a little colder, a little darker, a little more ready for the ancient ones to return and reclaim what they have always considered theirs. The fire never really goes out. It only spreads, invisible, inevitable, consuming everything that makes us human, until only the shadows remain. And in those shadows, something very old and very hungry is waiting to be born. Tonight, I'll be your guide on a journey into one of the most chilling and enduring mysteries of the Cold War era. Picture this: a winter night deep in the Ural Mountains, 1959. A group of young adventurers huddle in a tent pitched on the snowy slope of a peak ominously named Dead Mountain. They laugh, write in their journals by flashlight, and plan the next day's trek. They don't know it yet, but this will be their last night alive. This is the true story of the Dyatlov Pass incident, a mystery that has haunted investigators for over 60 years. My name is James, and I've spent weeks combing through case files, diaries, and witness accounts related to what happened to those 9 hikers back in 1959. The more I uncover, the more the Dyatlov Pass case feels like something pulled from a nightmare, hovering between fact and fiction. Let's walk through it step by step, as if we're building the case ourselves. The story begins in late January 1959. 10 experienced ski hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute set out on an expedition to reach a peak called Otorten in the northern Urals. Most were in their early 20s, 7 men and 2 women, led by 23-year-old radio engineering student Igor Dyatlov. The only exception was an older, more seasoned instructor. On January 23rd, they received their official route papers and departed from the city of Sverdlovsk, now Yekaterinburg, by train. You can imagine them aboard, excited, proud, maybe singing along as one of them strummed a mandolin they'd brought. After 2 days on the train, the group arrived at a remote town near the northern Urals, home to a Soviet penal colony. From there, they traveled by bus, then hitched a ride in the back of a woodcutter's truck to reach the last inhabited village, Vizhai. The villagers must have looked at the students with a mix of admiration and concern. The trail they intended to follow was classified as Category 3, the most difficult, and they were attempting it in February, the harshest month of the year. On January 27th, the Dyatlov group left Vizhai and began their trek into the wilderness. One member, Yuri Yudin, was already suffering from health issues. He had rheumatism and a congenital spinal condition that made long hikes agonizing. On January 28th, his joint pain became unbearable, and he reluctantly turned back. By saving himself, he unknowingly became the expedition's sole survivor. Yuri Yudin would never see his friends alive again. The remaining 9 hikers pushed deeper into the wild, unaware of the fate that awaited them. Diaries and recovered photos later helped investigators reconstruct their route. By January 31st, they'd reached a highland area and cached extra food and supplies in a wooded valley, meant for the return journey. Spirits seemed high. They joked, took pictures, and even produced a satirical newspaper they called the Evening Otorten. One entry poked fun at local Yeti legends, claiming, "From now on, we know that the snowmen exist." On February 1st, they began moving through a mountain pass, later named Dyatlov Pass in their memory. Their plan was to cross and camp on the other side, but the weather turned against them. A violent snowstorm and near-zero visibility caused them to veer off course. Instead of making it to the valley beyond, they found themselves on the slope of a peak called Kholat Shyakho, which in the local Mansi language means dead mountain. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late in the day to descend the 1.5 kilometers into the forest for shelter. Instead, Dyatlov made a controversial decision. They would camp right there on the slope, fully exposed. Perhaps he didn't want to lose altitude, or maybe he wanted to prove they could endure the elements on open ground. They set up their large tent on a bare patch of snow, leveling it into the slope. It was a decision that would later be scrutinized heavily. That night, February 1st, 1959, was brutally cold. Temperatures hovered near minus 20 degrees Celsius. Winds screamed over the ridge. Still, inside the tent, the group was relatively warm and secure. Forensic analysis later confirmed they had dinner around 6 to 7 p.m. One of the final photographs recovered shows them laughing as they set up camp in the dim twilight. Despite the howling wind, they appeared calm, writing, eating, preparing for bed. They had no idea of the terror waiting just a few hours ahead. Sometime after midnight, something happened. We have no witnesses, only physical evidence. But what that evidence reveals is chilling. The tent was slashed open from the inside. The 9 hikers burst out into a raging snowstorm, dressed only in their sleeping clothes, some barefoot, others with only socks. They left behind coats, boots, tools, food, maps, and gear, as if escaping an immediate and overwhelming threat. Temperatures were around minus 30 degrees Celsius. That's minus 22 Fahrenheit. And yet something terrified or compelled them so completely that they fled their only shelter into the lethal dark. What could have caused such panic? That's the question that has haunted investigators for over 6 decades. When the group failed to return to Vijay by February 12th as planned, there was no immediate panic. Delays were common in such remote expeditions. But by February 20th, the hikers' families demanded a search. The Ural Polytechnic Institute sent student volunteers. Soon, the Soviet Army and local militia joined in. Planes and helicopters scanned the desolate terrain. Searchers braved brutal conditions, slogging through deep snow and freezing winds. Among them was a student named Mikhail Sharavin. On February 26th, his team made a grim discovery. They found the collapsed and half-buried tent on the slope of Kholat Syakhl. Using an ice pick, Sharavin cut through the snow-packed entrance. What he found inside defied logic. The tent had been slashed open from within. Inside, the hiker's gear was laid out neatly. Boots, coats, maps, a flask of alcohol, even a plate with slices of salted pork fat. Nothing indicated chaos or struggle. It looked like they'd simply stopped mid-meal and fled. Outside the tent, the rescuers found tracks. 9 sets of footprints heading downhill in single file. Some showed people wearing only one shoe, or just socks. A few were completely barefoot, and yet the tracks were calm. Not a mad scramble, but an orderly, hurried march into the storm. The footprints continued for nearly 500 meters, toward a dense forest, before vanishing beneath new snow. It was as though the group had made a calculated decision to walk into the woods. Search teams were baffled. What could have made experienced hikers abandon shelter, barefoot and half-dressed, in sub-zero cold? As dusk fell on February 26th, the rescuers were forced to pause for the night. But they resumed the search the following day, fanning out toward the forest. At the edge of the woods, beneath a tall Siberian cedar, they found a small, burned-out fire. Beside it lay the first 2 bodies, Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Yuri Krivonishenko, shoeless, dressed only in underwear. The branches above them were snapped 5 meters high. Bits of skin and torn clothing clung to the bark. One of them had clearly climbed the tree, perhaps to spot the tent or escape something. Krivonishenko had burns on his body. His right hand was missing a piece of flesh, later confirmed to have been bitten off, possibly to suppress a scream or stay awake as hypothermia took hold. Their hands and feet were deep reddish-brown, a clear sign of frostbite. They'd stripped branches for kindling, but the fire had burned out long before they died. 2 friends, clinging to life in a snow-choked forest, reduced to embers and silence. And the true horror was only beginning. What I can't shake is the image of that vast black sky looming over the scene. About 300 meters from the cedar tree, heading back toward the tent, searchers discovered the body of Igor Dyatlov. He lay on his back in the snow, head facing upslope toward the tent, as if he had been crawling back. Dyatlov was more clothed than the 2 found under the tree, wearing a flannel shirt, a sweater, and pants, but he still lacked a coat and boots. Only socks covered his feet. One of his arms was frozen in a vertical position, reaching toward the sky and grasping a small birch branch. His other hand was pressed against his chest. Those who examined his body noted he seemed to be shielding something close to his heart. Perhaps a photograph or notebook, though nothing unusual was ever found. His expression, once the snow was cleared from his face, was strangely serene. His eyes remained open. Not far from Dyatlov lay the body of Zinaida Zina Kolmogorova, a 22-year-old student. She was slightly better dressed than Dyatlov, wearing 2 sweaters and 2 pairs of pants, but like the others, she had only socks on her feet. Her body faced the tent, and her arms were extended forward, elbows bent, as if she had been crawling on her stomach, desperately trying to reach shelter before the cold overwhelmed her. Along Zina's right side was a long, bright red bruise stretching across her torso, resembling the kind of injury that might be caused by a baton or the butt of a rifle. It was an unusual wound. No other significant external injuries were found. It wasn't until March 5th that the searchers found the 5th body, Rustem Slobodin. The 23-year-old was lying face down in the snow, approximately 480 meters from the cedar tree, about halfway back to the tent. Slobodin had been dressed more warmly. He wore a long-sleeved undershirt, a sweater, 2 pairs of pants, 4 pairs of socks, and a single felt-lined boot on his right foot. His head was uncovered, and his left foot had only a sock. In his right hand, he clutched a small closed pocket knife. The autopsy revealed a 7-inch-long fracture in his skull, consistent with a significant impact. However, the blow was not considered fatal. The medical examiner concluded he could have sustained the injury in a fall, and then continued moving for at least an hour afterward. Like Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, Doroshenko, and Krivonishenko, Slobodin ultimately died of hypothermia. All 5 of the first victims had no fatal external wounds. They simply froze to death in the brutal cold. Slobodin's watch was found shattered and had stopped at 8:45. Whether that was morning, evening, or even a different day remains unknown. Time itself, it seemed, had frozen. Now imagine being Yuri Yudin, the lone survivor who turned back, being summoned to identify your friends' bodies one by one. The first 5 victims were airlifted to the morgue in Ivdel for autopsy and identification. With a heavy heart, Yudin confirmed each of them. But 4 hikers were still missing. Weeks passed with no sign of them. As spring arrived, snow began to melt. Then, on May 4th, almost 3 months after the disappearance, nature revealed what remained. A local Mansi tribesman named Kurikov, assisting the search with his dog, picked up a scent near a rocky ravine further into the woods. About 75 meters beyond the cedar tree and 1,500 meters from the tent, searchers found shreds of clothing on a tree branch. Digging into the snow-filled ravine, they uncovered the final 4 bodies, buried under nearly 4 meters of compacted snow. The victims were Lyudmila Luda Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Nikolai Thibault Brignol, and Alexander Kolevatov. Their bodies were positioned 75 meters deeper into the forest than the cedar, lying together at the bottom of the ravine. Notably, 3 of the 4 were better dressed than the earlier victims. It appeared they had taken clothing from those who died first. Dubinina, for instance, was found wearing Krivonishenko's torn and burned brown pants, and her foot was wrapped in part of his wool sweater. Thibault Brignol wore Dubinina's faux fur coat and hat. Kolevatov had added a spare sweater and pants, likely borrowed from another hiker. This exchange of clothing suggests that the final survivors scavenged from the dead in a tragic but practical effort to stay alive. Yet the condition of these 4 bodies only deepened the mystery. Unlike the first 5, 3 of the final 4 had suffered fatal physical trauma, injuries described by forensic experts as extraordinary. Nikolai Thibault Brignol had a massive skull fracture. His skull was crushed, with a break measuring nearly 8 inches. Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov both suffered chest trauma. 10 ribs broken on Dubinina, 5 on Zolotaryov. A forensic specialist said the force required to inflict such injuries would have been enormous, comparable to what occurs in a high-speed car accident. Strangely, none of these victims had any external bruising or soft tissue damage to explain their internal trauma. It was as if their bodies had absorbed a devastating pressure or shock without breaking the skin. The fourth victim, Alexander Kolovatov, had a broken nose, an open wound behind one ear, and a twisted neck, but his cause of death was not definitively determined. Like the others, hypothermia likely played a major role. Then there were the disturbing details that made this case infamous. All 4 of the bodies in the ravine had signs of facial tissue damage absent in the other victims. Dubinina was missing her tongue, her eyes, portions of her lips, and part of her skull bone. Zolotaryov's eyeballs were missing. Kolovatov lacked eyebrows. These injuries led to wild speculation. Were they attacked? Mutilated? However, medical experts offered a more grounded explanation. The 4 were found in a creek bed, and it's likely that water exposure and scavenging animals caused the soft tissue to decompose or be eaten during the months they lay there. In Dubinina's case, the autopsy found roughly 100 grams of blood in her stomach, suggesting her heart was still beating when her tongue was removed, meaning the damage likely occurred just after death. As horrifying as it sounds, most investigators believe the soft tissue injuries were post-mortem effects. But once this information became public, it ignited a storm of speculation. Murder, cover-ups, even supernatural forces. Zolotaryov, notably, was found with a camera around his neck, a model not found among the other hiker's gear, and in his hand a pen and notepad, as if he had tried to record a final message. The notepad, however, was blank. Investigators were baffled. With several deaths involving unusual trauma, a criminal case was opened. At first, suspicion fell on the local Mansi people, reindeer herders native to the region, perhaps for defending sacred land. But no evidence supported this. There were no other footprints, no signs of struggle, and the Mansi had helped with the search. They also had no history of violence against hikers. Next came theories of avalanche, but the tense orientation and the footprint pattern didn't support that explanation either. We'll revisit this later. Animal attack was also ruled out. No animal tracks were found, and the wounds didn't match claw or bite marks. In the end, Soviet authorities concluded that no other humans were involved in the Dyatlov group's fate. One doctor stated that the force that killed Dubinina and Zolotaryov was beyond what any human could deliver. Then came a strange Cold War twist. Forensic testing found elevated levels of radiation on some of the hikers' clothing, specifically Dubinina's brown sweater and Krivonishenko's wool pants. That made no sense in the context of a ski trip. The radiation was only discovered because one investigator happened to have access to a Geiger counter. Theories exploded. Had they encountered a secret weapon test or radioactive fallout? But a more mundane explanation emerged. Krivonishenko had previously worked at the Mayak nuclear facility and was part of the cleanup crew after the 1957 Kishtim disaster. His clothing may have carried residual contamination. Similarly, Kolovatov had studied nuclear physics and worked at a classified institute in Moscow, possibly contributing further contamination. In short, the radiation likely had nothing to do with what happened at Dyatlov Pass. Still, there were reports from family members who claimed that some bodies had unusually dark skin and gray hair, sparking even more rumors of nuclear or chemical exposure. Authorities insisted. The discoloration of the skin was later attributed to natural mummification, a side effect of prolonged exposure to sun and sub-zero temperatures. Similarly, hair can change color due to environmental exposure or chemical processes during embalming. But to grieving families in 1959, radioactive clothing and orange-hued skin sounded like something torn from the pages of a Cold War sci-fi horror. By May of that year, the official investigation was drawing to a close, without a single definitive answer. Lead investigator Lev Ivanov was under considerable pressure to wrap things up. In his final report, Ivanov wrote that the hikers died due to the effect of an unknown compelling force. It was a vague catch-all phrase, an admission that they couldn't explain what had occurred. No signs of foul play were found, and the case was officially closed without criminal charges. The files were stamped secret and buried in Soviet archives. The area around Dyatlov Pass was declared off-limits to future expeditions for the next 3 years, ostensibly to prevent further tragedies, but many believe it was an effort to keep investigators and curiosity seekers away. The inquest's final conclusion, that the hikers perished due to a compelling natural force, only raised more questions than it answered. Imagine the weight of that silence. 9 vibrant lives lost, and their families told they would never know why. In the Soviet Union of 1959, that was the end of the line. Some of the families sensed a cover-up. Zenaida Kolmogorova's mother, along with Igor Dyatlov's parents, reportedly received veiled warnings. Officials allegedly told them, "You will never know the truth, so stop asking questions." In those days, when the party or the KGB told you to be quiet, you listened. You stayed quiet out of fear. So the families buried their children without answers, and the Dyatlov incident faded into Cold War legend. It was spoken of in whispers, in Ural classrooms, mountaineering clubs, and late-night kitchen conversations. As for Yuri Yudin, the lone survivor who had turned back, he lived the rest of his life burdened by survivor's guilt and a relentless obsession with the truth. Yudin never accepted that a mere natural event had caused his friends' deaths. In his gut, he believed it was something man-made. In interviews before his death in 2013, Yudin accused the Soviet authorities of knowing far more than they admitted. In fact, shortly before he died, Yudin publicly stated that he believed the hikers had been taken from the tent at gunpoint and executed. He even speculated that Lyudmila Dubinina's tongue had been removed because she was the most outspoken of the group. These were grave accusations, and he had no concrete evidence, only decades of unresolved suspicion. Whether he was right or wrong, Yudin's convictions show how deeply the Dyatlov mystery could root itself into a person's soul. And now, decades later, I find myself in Yudin's shoes, a modern investigator sifting through decades-old reports and newly emerging theories. With every piece of evidence I examine, I can feel that bitter wind blowing down from Dead Mountain. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of the world's most enduring mysteries, precisely because it straddles the line between the explainable and the unknowable. Over the years, countless theories have been proposed, some grounded in science, others veering toward conspiracy or the paranormal. Let's take a look at these possibilities one by one, like investigative paths branching out from the same haunting source. Any plausible theory must account for all the unusual elements: the slashed tent, the hiker's partial undress, the strange injuries, radiation traces, reported lights in the sky, and the veil of secrecy that followed. It's a tall order, but let's walk these paths together. The first and most widely accepted theory is the one modern Russian authorities eventually embraced: an avalanche. To many, this explanation makes the most sense. Imagine the scene: 9 exhausted hikers asleep in their tent, pitched on a slope. Suddenly, a slab of snow above them fractures and crashes down. The fabric of the tent buckles. There's a grinding, thunderous noise. In an instant, panic sets in. They believe a full avalanche is moments away. Acting fast, the group slices through the tent wall from the inside, Perhaps the entrance was blocked or buried, and escapes into the blizzard, grabbing nothing, driven by raw instinct. This theory gained significant ground in 2019 and 2020 when the Russian government reopened the investigation and declared that a slab avalanche was the official cause of death. A separate scientific study that same year used advanced computer simulations to support this conclusion. Viewed through this lens, the hiker's behavior appears rational. If you're convinced an avalanche is imminent, the right move is to flee. Fast. The theory continues. The snow slab, possibly dislodged by wind or by heat from the group's stove earlier in the evening, collapsed onto the tent, partially burying it and making strange, alarming noises. Experienced as they were, the hikers recognized the threat and immediately evacuated, heading for lower ground near the tree line, where they hoped to regroup. They didn't pause to dress or gather equipment. Every second mattered. They traveled nearly a mile through snow, wind, and darkness. There, they tried to build a fire and stay warm. We know this happened. Evidence of the fire was found beneath the cedar tree. A snow shelter, or snow cave, was dug near a ravine, with fir branches placed on the ground to insulate from the cold. New story, the Tunguska conspiracy greetings, listeners of Sleep Theories. Before we begin tonight's tale, I hope you're having a peaceful day, or night, wherever you are. Whether it's midnight in London, late afternoon in New York, or sunrise in Tokyo, know that these stories connect us across time zones and continents. If you're new here, consider subscribing to Sleep Theories for more tales that blur the line between mystery and history. Now, settle in as we explore a story buried deep in Soviet archives for over 60 years. Dr. Alexei Morozov, Soviet Geological Survey, Tunguska Region, Siberia, October 1959. Classification: Secretno, Declassified, 2025. Entry: 1. October 12, 1959. Audio. Quality: poor. Wind interference. This is Dr. Alexei Morozov of the Soviet Geological Survey. Designation 4471. I'm recording this for the scientific record, though I suspect it will never see the light of day. The date is October 12, 1959. I'm approximately 40 kilometers southeast of the Tunguska impact zone, and I fear we've made a terrible mistake coming here. Let me start from the beginning. 3 weeks ago, I was summoned to Moscow by what I believed was the Academy of Sciences, but the meeting didn't take place at the familiar offices. Instead, I was escorted to a gray, nondescript building near Lubyanka Square. Even a geophysicist like myself knew what that meant. The man waiting for me wore a crisp Soviet military uniform, but his eyes held the cold calculation I'd come to recognize from my days in Antarctica. KGB, without a doubt. Dr. Morozov, he said, not bothering with introductions. Your expertise is required for a matter of national interest. He slid several high-resolution photographs across the metal table. Satellite imagery, far too detailed for any civilian agency. The photos showed the Tunguska region from above, but something was wrong. Strange geometric overlays, with radiation measurements marked in red. What am I looking at? I asked. I am Colonel Volov, he replied, and you are looking at proof that the Tunguska explosion in 1908 was not what our scientists claimed. The images were disturbing. Radiation patterns formed precise hexagonal shapes across kilometers of forest floor, nothing like what a meteor would leave behind. Cosmos satellites picked this up 3 months ago, Volov continued. 51 years later, and the site is still active. He pointed to the timestamps on the radiation data. The energy pulsed at regular intervals, like a beacon. My mind reeled. This suggests an artificial source, I said. Exactly, Volov nodded, though there was no warmth in his smile. That's why you're going to Tunguska, Doctor. Your cover is a geological survey for the 5-year mineral plan. Your true objective is to locate the source of these signals. And if I refuse, I asked, then you'll be reassigned to study rocks in Siberia permanently, in much less comfortable conditions. The threat was not subtle. I accepted the assignment that very afternoon. Now, as I sit in this wind-lashed tent surrounded by bent, broken trees, still twisted from the blast of half a century ago, I understand why the earlier expeditions never returned full reports. Something about this forest is deeply wrong, in ways that have nothing to do with physics or geology. This morning, my instruments registered the first anomaly. Entry 2, October 13th, 1959. Audio quality, moderate. Electronic interference detected. The electromagnetic readings are incomprehensible. I spent the entire day taking measurements in a grid pattern, moving steadily toward what the 1927 Kulik expedition identified as the blast epicenter. Every instrument I use, magnetometer, Geiger counter, seismograph, registers anomalies that defy known physical laws. Instead of the gradual increase in magnetic field strength one might expect from a buried metallic mass, the field pulses with mathematical regularity at 3-second intervals. Pulse, pause, pulse, pause. Like a heartbeat. The Geiger counter reveals something even stranger. Background radiation isn't evenly elevated, as one would anticipate if this were the site of a nuclear event. Instead, the radiation forms distinct geometric shapes. When mapped, the readings create perfect hexagons, each approximately 50 meters in diameter, arranged in a honeycomb pattern that stretches beyond the range of my instruments. Colonel Volov remains largely silent during our trek. He carries no scientific equipment. Instead, his pack contains radio gear far more advanced than anything issued to a standard geological team. He contacts Moscow twice daily using encrypted codes I cannot decipher. Our local guides refuse to accompany us past the outer tree line. They speak in hushed tones about lights dancing beneath the ice at night, and a sound they describe as iron screaming. When I pressed the eldest among them, he offered only this cryptic phrase, "The sky fell there," but something else rose up. Initially, I dismissed it as folklore until last night. At exactly 03 hours, I awoke to a sound unlike anything I've ever heard. A deep, rhythmic vibration resonated up through the ground itself. It lasted precisely 3 minutes, then ceased with sudden finality. Volov was already awake, standing at the edge of our camp, radio in hand. "Did you record that?" he asked. I hadn't. And that oversight haunts me now. The sound was so utterly alien that my mind refused to categorize it. "What was it?" I asked. His expression, bathed in moonlight, gave nothing away. "That," he replied, "is the reason we're here." This morning, I discovered several of my instruments had not simply failed, but malfunctioned in consistent, inexplicable ways. The magnetometer, for instance, now points to magnetic north as being directly beneath the blast epicenter, regardless of our actual position. The seismograph, meanwhile, recorded a flawless sine wave every 3 seconds throughout the night. That kind of geological regularity should be impossible. Something is calling from beneath the permafrost. Entry 3, October 15th, 1959. Audio quality. Poor, severe electronic interference. We've reached the epicenter. I now understand why Kulik's expedition found no crater. This was not an impact. It was an emergence. The blast zone radiates outward for kilometers in every direction. Trees flattened into a perfect radial pattern that has baffled scientists for decades. Yet at the exact center, within a circle roughly 100 meters wide, the forest remains untouched. Towering pines stand undisturbed, their bark scorched but their trunks unbroken, as if the force of the explosion had flowed around them rather than through. But the soil tells a different story. My instruments detect metallic fragments buried within, but analysis shows something deeply disturbing. The isotopic ratios are not just abnormal, they're impossible. These metals contain elements with isotopes that do not occur in nature, arranged in configurations that suggest artificial, perhaps intelligent design. While taking samples this morning, my spade struck something beneath the frozen soil. After an hour of cautious excavation, I unearthed a shard of metal unlike anything I've encountered in over 2 decades of geological work. It's approximately 15 centimeters long, smooth as obsidian, perfectly black, and reflects no light. It's visually absent. Staring at it strains the eye, as though my brain is resisting what it sees. Even more unsettling, it vibrates, a barely perceptible constant tremor. Frequency, exactly 3 hertz, the same rhythm as the magnetic pulses I've been tracking. When I presented the fragment to Colonel Volov, his reaction confirmed my worst fears. "Where exactly did you find this?" he demanded, snatching it from my hands with gloved fingers. "Roughly 2 meters down, directly beneath our current position. You will note that location precisely, and you will excavate no further." He placed the shard in a lead-lined case I hadn't noticed until then. "Your orders are to survey and report, not collect specimens." "But Colonel, this could be the key to Dr. Morozov." His voice was low, firm, final. "The last scientist who asked too many questions about what we found here is now buried beneath 2 meters of ice. I trust you understand my meaning." The threat landed with a casual cruelty that took me a moment to fully comprehend. Previous scientists, previous expeditions. How many had come before us? That night, while Volov was absorbed in radio transmissions, I returned to the dig site. I took further readings. The results were nothing short of shocking. Ground-penetrating radar revealed what appears to be part of a vast, buried structure. Hexagonal chambers connected by linear corridors. Not random metal dispersal, but deliberate construction. Architectural design. The structure extends far below our measuring capabilities. Whatever lies beneath the Tunguska site is not natural, and it is not human. And according to radiocarbon analysis of the surrounding soil, it predates the 1908 explosion by thousands, possibly tens of thousands, of years. That event in 1908 didn't bring something here. It revealed what was already hidden. Entry 4, October 17th, 1959. Audio. Quality moderate, background humming. Noted, I have accessed Colonel Volov's classified case files. Yes, it was a breach of protocol, one that may very well cost me my life. But scientific obsession has always been my greatest flaw. While Volov was occupied with his evening radio check, I photographed several documents from his secured case. What I discovered rewrote my entire understanding of this expedition and of the Tunguska event itself. The files contain a series of telegrams dated as far back as 1908. Exchanges between American inventor Nikola Tesla and Arctic explorer Robert Peary. In them, Tesla describes experiments conducted from his Wardenclyffe facility on Long Island, wireless transmission of electrical energy through Earth's atmosphere. According to the messages, Tesla had chosen the Arctic region as a target area, where Peary was conducting explorations. One particular telegram, dated June 28, 1908, just 2 days before the Tunguska blast, reads, "Peary, final test scheduled SO 214 GMT, June 30th. Expect atmospheric disturbance, Arctic region. Exercise extreme caution." Energy dispersal may exceed projections. Tesla. Peary's reply, dated July 2nd. Tesla, your test succeeded beyond measure. Sky over Siberia lit like day. Effect visible from Greenland. Indigenous tribes report the ground shook 800 meters from target zone. Whatever you activated, it responded. Recommend immediate cessation of experiments. Peary. But the most chilling entry was a private journal note by Tesla, later acquired by Soviet intelligence. The transmission succeeded, but not as intended. We awakened something not meant to be disturbed. The beam pierced not only the sky, but the ancient ice. What we believed to be a test of power was in fact a signal. We are not the first, merely the most reckless. The Wardenclyffe Tower was dismantled days after the explosion. Officially, bankruptcy, but the KGB's records suggest a different motive. Tesla himself warned in another letter, "Some discoveries are too dangerous for the world as it exists." The KGB files also reveal that Soviet authorities had been monitoring the site for decades. Geological teams in the 1930s detected similar structures to what I've now mapped. Their work was classified, and those scientists were either reassigned or eliminated. Since 1945, at least 3 expeditions have come here. None returned intact. 2 vanished without trace. The third, led by Dr. Yuri Petrov, ended in tragedy. He was found frozen in his tent, his final notebook describing hexagonal chambers beyond measure, and a sound like the earth breathing. Our current expedition was only approved after Cosmos satellite imagery showed a rise in anomalous radiation. Activity beginning in 1957, the patterns have been intensifying. Each night at exactly 3 Hoa hours, the low-frequency hum begins. It lasts 3 minutes, but tonight, it's louder, more structured. I swear I hear logic within it. Mathematical sequencing that implies not randomness, but intelligence. Volov watches me more closely now. He suspects what I've done. He knows I've seen the files. If anything happens to me, I hope this journal survives long enough to reveal the truth about what we've discovered at Tunguska. The explosion in 1908 wasn't the result of a meteor impact, nor was it strictly speaking Tesla's wireless energy transmission, although that may have been the trigger. It was a response, an ancient one, something far older, long dormant beneath the ice, awakened by our signals. Entry 5, October 19, 1959. Audio. Quality. Excellent. All interference ceased. The silence is worse than the noise. For 3 days, electromagnetic interference has steadily increased. Communications with Moscow became impossible. My instruments registered values far beyond their designed thresholds. The deep rhythmic vibrations beneath the earth grew stronger, lasting longer each time. Then, at dawn today, it all stopped. No interference, no readings, no vibrations. A complete and sudden stillness. The absence is far more disturbing than the anomalies themselves. It suggests something has concluded. Something beneath us has fulfilled its purpose. Colonel Volov received new instructions during the night via emergency radio protocol. We are to begin excavation immediately, using equipment airdropped under cover of darkness. Among the supplies were advanced drilling systems, far beyond what's necessary for any standard geological survey. "We're going down," he told me, without ceremony. "Moscow wants answers." "Colonel," I said, "I must strongly advise against aggressive excavation. We don't yet understand the structure's composition or stability." "Dr. Morozov," he interrupted, "you are here to observe, not to give orders. The decision has already been made." The drilling began at 800 hours. We passed through the permafrost with ease, but at a depth of 5 meters, the drill struck something unexpected. Not rock or metal, but something that rang like a bell. By midday, we had exposed part of an upper surface that defies geological explanation. It is formed of hexagonal plates, each about 2 meters wide, fitted together with impossible precision. The material is harder than steel, yet seems to possess a crystalline structure, as though it had grown rather than been manufactured. The most unsettling discovery came when we brushed away the final layer of ice and earth. The plates were undamaged, uncorroded, gleaming as if newly forged. Light pulsed through them, every 3 seconds, in the same rhythm I've been recording for weeks. The structure is active, possibly alive, though that word feels insufficient to describe what we're seeing. As we cleared more of the surface, I noticed new energy signatures. The pulses followed intelligent patterns, prime numbers, Fibonacci sequences, and other mathematical constants, signals that screamed intention. "It's communicating," I said during our break. "It's trying to talk to us." Volov shook his head. "No, Doctor, it's talking to something else. We're just eavesdropping." Later that evening, while reviewing data, I stumbled across something that shook me to my core. The electromagnetic patterns I've been recording match long-dismissed radio anomalies observed at the Jadril Bank Observatory in England, signals believed to be background radiation. But those signals aren't coming from space. They originate here, from Tunguska, and they've been transmitting outward, into the cosmos since 1908. Whatever lies beneath us has been calling out for over 50 years. Entry 6, October 21st, 1959. Audio quality poor, voice shows signs of stress we've broken through. After 2 days of careful drilling, we opened a passage large enough to lower instruments and personnel into the structure below. The chamber we entered is immense. Its walls curve away into darkness beyond our light's reach. The air inside is not stale, as one would expect. It's warm, metallic in taste, and charged with an electric tingle that makes your skin crawl. The walls are lined with the same hexagonal plating, but the patterns of light are more complex here, cascading pulses that move in waves around the perimeter, synchronized like circuits in a living machine. Against Volov's direct orders, I descended into the chamber using climbing gear. He had wanted to wait for specialists from Moscow, but my need to understand outweighed my fear. What I found down there defies explanation. The chamber isn't empty. It houses machinery. But that word doesn't do justice to what I saw. Geometric structures rise like crystalline trees from the floor, their surfaces shifting, reconfiguring in ways I still can't explain. These mechanisms are self-repairing, self-modifying. At the chamber's center stands a pillar, 3 meters tall, composed of the same obsidian-like material as the fragment I unearthed earlier. But unlike the shard, this pillar is active, pulsing with inner light, vibrating with that now familiar 3 hertz rhythm. When I placed my hand on its surface, the entire chamber reacted. Lights surged across the walls. The structures hummed with resonance. And I felt something, a presence. Not a physical force, but an intelligence. Ancient, immense, awakened. In that moment, I understood what Tesla had truly done in 1908. His experiment hadn't merely broadcast energy into the sky. It had found a resonance, pierced the planet's electromagnetic sheath, and struck this buried construct with just the right frequency to wake it up. The explosion that followed wasn't a failure. It was a startup sequence. The structure beneath Tunguska had reactivated after millennia of silence, and the only outlet for the released energy was upward, obliterating the forest above. When I returned to the surface, I found Volov locked in an urgent transmission with Moscow. "Yes, sir. It appears to be functional, I heard him say. No, sir, we do not yet understand its purpose. What do you mean, similar structures? That phrase stopped me cold. Similar structures. How many more of these are there? How long have they slept beneath us? That night, while I tried to process the implications, the underground structure began transmitting again. But this time, the signals were different. No longer simple pulses. They had structure, complexity. My instruments interpreted the emissions as modulated communication. The machine was no longer awakening, it was reaching out. Entry 7, October 23, 1959. Audio, quality, good, voice tense but controlled. They're coming for me. This morning, Colonel Volov received final orders. Terminate the expedition and return to Moscow immediately. But not before all physical evidence is secured, and all personnel are debriefed. I know what that means. During the night, a new team arrived, men without insignias, speaking with unfamiliar accents. They brought instruments I cannot identify and sealed containers holding unknown chemical compounds. Whatever this operation is now, it has moved far beyond science. Dr. Morozov, Volov said over breakfast. Your contributions will be properly noted in our final report. However, due to the sensitivity of our findings, certain security protocols must be enforced. What kind of protocols? The kind that ensure state secrets remain secret. I have hidden this journal, along with my recordings and data, in a cache, approximately 1 kilometer northeast of our base camp. If I do not return to retrieve them, perhaps someone else will. Before they silence me, I want to record my final conclusion. The structure beneath Tunguska is not human in origin. Its materials, architecture, and operational systems point to a civilization exponentially more advanced than ours. Based on geological strata, I estimate the structure has remained buried here for at least 10,000 years, perhaps far longer. It is not a weapon, it is a beacon, a signal tower built to transmit across the stars. The electromagnetic pulses, those 3-second intervals, are not random. They are a deliberate call, announcing Earth's coordinates to anyone who might be listening. In 1908, Nikola Tesla didn't just test wireless energy. He lit the signal flare. The massive discharge of energy that caused the Tunguska explosion was not the result of a meteor or accident. It was simply ancient machinery powering up. Like a generator dormant for geological ages, it suddenly roared back to life. But the most terrifying aspect of this discovery is what it suggests about our planet's history. If one such installation lies buried beneath Siberia, how many others are scattered across the Earth? Who built them? And for what purpose? I fear that we are not alone in the universe. Worse, I fear we never have been. Since our excavation began, the electromagnetic signals emanating from the Tunguska site have been growing in both strength and complexity. What started as simple mathematical sequences has evolved into something resembling conversation. Structured exchanges of data, call and response patterns, acknowledgments, and confirmations. Something is responding to the beacon. Last night I observed lights in the sky. Nothing like any known atmospheric or astronomical phenomenon. These objects moved with clear intent, forming geometric patterns in perfect sync with the underground transmissions. They hovered silently above our camp for nearly an hour before disappearing over the horizon. Volov pretended not to see them, but I noticed he spent the rest of the night in constant radio contact with Moscow. This morning, he announced that our mission was complete. Complete? I asked. We've barely begun to understand what we've found here. We've confirmed the presence of anomalous structures and documented their basic characteristics, he replied. That was our directive, to locate the source of the satellite anomalies. We've uncovered something that could rewrite human history, I argued. We're standing at the edge of a discovery that changes everything." Volov's expression remained impassive. "Dr. Morozov, there are forces at work here that exceed the bounds of scientific inquiry. This site will be classified at the highest levels and placed under permanent surveillance. Your role is over. And if I refuse to stay silent, then you will join the others who ask questions they weren't supposed to." The threat was delivered with cold finality. I understood. My options were silence or death, but I will not let this discovery be buried. Entry 8, October 24th, 1959. Final entry. Audio quality. Whispered, recorded in secret. They believe I'm asleep. The debriefing began this afternoon with injections, allegedly vaccines against Arctic illnesses. But I recognized the symptoms immediately. Memory suppression compounds designed to muddle recollection and render testimony incoherent. My training in Antarctica taught me methods for resisting such effects. I induced vomiting before the drugs took hold, all while feigning compliance. While the others believe I'm sedated, I've recovered my hidden cache and am recording this final entry. In a few hours, I will be flown back to Moscow for extended debriefing. I do not expect to survive that process. Before they silence me, I must document what I've learned. The structure beneath Tunguska is not merely a communications node, it is part of a network. During my last descent, I located corridors that extended deeper underground. Following them as far as my equipment would allow, I detected faint but distinct electromagnetic signatures, matching those of the Tunguska site, emanating from locations thousands of kilometers away. A global network of buried constructs, a system of interconnected transmission hubs aligned with the Earth's magnetic field. Whatever civilization built these machines, they were not native to Earth. The mathematical constants used in their design, gravitational harmonics, stellar ratios, suggest an origin far from this solar system. They came here. They built this. And then they vanished. But they left their systems behind, dormant, intact, waiting. In 1908, Nikola Tesla unknowingly reactivated one of them. His wireless energy test, though well-intentioned, struck the Tunguska installation with the exact frequency needed to awaken it. Now, the beacon is active again, broadcasting Earth's coordinates to the stars, and something has heard it. The lights I saw in the sky are not natural. They are surveyors, scouts. The structured electromagnetic signals I've been recording, these are not idle communications. They are data packets, instructions, coordinates, timetables, plans. This is not exploration, this is reconnaissance. We have reactivated something that was never meant to be awakened, and we lack the knowledge to understand it or the tools to contain it. I can hear them now, approaching my tent. Boots crunching over frozen ground. Voices speaking in languages I do not recognize. They've discovered my absence from the infirmary. If this recording survives, if someone finds this cache and understands what I've left behind, know this. The explosion in 1908 was not the end of a mystery. It was the beginning of a sequence. The door is no longer locked. It is opening. Whatever you do, do not dig further. It listens. It remembers. And now, it knows where we are. Recording ends. Electromagnetic interference resumes Soviet State Security Archive file, Tunguska Black. 7. Date, October 30th, 1959. Doctor. Alexei Morozov was found deceased in his quarters at the Lubyanka Medical Facility on October 29th, 1959. Official cause of death. Complications from frostbite sustained during Arctic research. Status of personal effects. Confiscated and classified under state security protocol. All materials related to the Tunguska expedition are hereby sealed under Special Protocol 7. Access restricted to personnel with clearance level Obsidian or higher. The Tunguska site is now a restricted military zone. Unauthorized access is punishable by death. Official records. End posted to file sharing network. March 15, 2025. Removed at request of the Russian Federation. March 17, 2025. The preceding materials were discovered within a cache of declassified Soviet files released after the collapse of certain intelligence databases. Authentication is ongoing, but preliminary analysis indicates authenticity. Contrary to official reports, Dr. Morozov's journal was not destroyed. It was hidden, preserved in permafrost, waiting to be uncovered. Satellite imagery from 2024 reveals renewed activity at the Tunguska site. Electromagnetic anomalies have been detected by multiple international monitoring stations. Construction of unknown origin has begun at the coordinates identified by Dr. Morozov. The lights have returned to the Siberian sky. Whatever Tesla awakened in 1908 was only the beginning. The door is not just unlocking, it is opening.